Hey guys, thanks for watching. My name's Don, and my channel is all about fishing after the age of 70. For those of you that have seen some of my previous videos, I talk a little bit about everything. My primary goal with this channel was really to talk about bass fishing or fishing in general, but there's a lot of other subjects that are kind of related. Well, at least in my mind, everything's related. So today I thought I'd talk about something a little bit different. I was thinking long and hard the last few days about a subject, and it seemed to me it was certainly worthy of some discussion here on a video. So today's topic is, why do old fishermen, and maybe old people in general, suddenly seem to find religion? It's an interesting question. Uh, and I'm not going to get into a sermon here. Uh, Personally, I'm a born again Christian and I'm proud of it. I thank God every day for, my family and my health. Uh, I think, you know, as I said, I thank Him every day for my health. My health would be a lot better if I'd listened to Him or maybe taken a little bit better care of myself. But God is important in my life. But here's what I was thinking about the last couple of days. When I was younger, I mean very young, when I was 8 and 12 years old, I had an aunt. She was actually my mother's sister, and she's a very religious lady, very, very religious, very involved in her church. And she used to conduct Bible studies every Wednesday. So every Wednesday after school, I'd go home with my cousins, my younger brother, and uh, and we'd attend a Bible study. Now, to be honest with you, I don't think I paid any attention at all. Probably paid as much attention to her teaching this little Sunday school class as I probably did to my school teachers. My mind was way out yonder, probably thinking about a fishing trip I wanted to take, or I wanted to go hunting or play ball or do something else. But anyway, that was really my first exposure to anything to do with religion. My parents never made us go to church. I think we did go a few times, but I don't remember much about it. Uh, and so I spent probably the next 10 or 15 years of my life, kind of rudderless until I got married. And after I got married, my wife and I got interested in, we realized we shared kind of a common interest in terms of our belief systems. And so we started going to different churches. As a result, we kind of tried them all. Uh, couldn't begin to tell you the names of all of them. I do remember there were a couple of holy roller churches that weren't quite our style. When people start jumping up, speaking in tongues, that's kind of scary, and didn't really want any part of that. But uh, but we did attempt to go to a number of churches, and we finally found a church home in Westerville, Florida. Uh, my two children, my wife and I, were all baptized there, and we were members of that church for quite a while until we finally moved back up towards the Cleveland area and then eventually down to Florida. But then there was a gap, and a pretty good size gap, even though while I was involved in the church down in Westerville, Florida, even though then we had some Bible studies and attended some different groups. Once I got back up to Ohio, started getting involved in a lot of other things, not the least of which was work and bass tournaments. And so I found a pretty convenient excuse for not going to church on Sundays. I know you've already guessed what it is. If you're my age and you started fishing bass tournaments maybe back in the 70s, you already know what I'm going to say. Sundays weren't for church, Sundays were for bass tournaments. And so that was my excuse. And I've used that excuse off and on probably for the last, oh, at least the last 30 years, if not the last 40 years. And it's worked for me. It's worked pretty well. And, you know, in my prayers, I've acknowledged the fact that I could skip some of these tournaments with God, but you know, I kind of feel like anyway he's pretty much supported me along the way. But now I don't fish tournaments anymore. No more bass tournaments. It's just too much work. Getting too old. You know, I have a lot of, I mean, a lot of uh, uh, pressure to fish some of these tournaments because, you know, I talk a pretty good story, and a lot of these guys forget that I've won some tournaments in the past and want to see me get back out there again. But quite honestly, I just don't have the stamina. I just don't have the strength for it. But I have a lot of respect for the guys that can. And there's a lot of guys my age and older that are still out there, and, you know, they're still making a name for themselves, or they're just fishing small local tournaments, club tournaments, and having a good time in the process. And I give them all the credit in the world. That's great. But here I am now at my age. I still go fishing. I don't stay out nearly as long. But, you know, I've had a lot of time maybe to think more about my religion, about my beliefs, about God. And, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I am getting older. You know, I watched my mother, who pretty much was in a handicapped, uh, you know, wheelchair for probably 20 years of her life. Uh, but I watched as she got older, and she just seemed to all of a sudden get more interested in religion. I'd go over to her house, and if there wasn't a football game going on or a baseball game, she'd be watching one of these televangelists on television, and she really enjoyed it. And I think it was really important to her. She really wasn't physically able to go to church, so it was probably the next best thing for her. And then later, after my mother-in-law moved in with us, I watched the same thing. She, you know, all of a sudden at 85, she suddenly liked football. I'm not sure she understood it, but she suddenly started watching football. And again, in between the football, she would find different televangelists on television, and she would follow them as well. Matter of fact, she got pretty wrapped up with the old PTL club, which I don't want to go there because I was uh, I was against that group from the very beginning. I always thought Jim Baker was uh, you know, a sleazy salesman. Time proved that there were a lot of other people that thought that, and they did some investigation and put the boy in jail. But be that as it may, you know, it was still religion, and my mother was, my mother-in-law was really into it. So, you know, I'm thinking, well, now here I am, I'm their age. Suddenly I'm not quite where they were, but I'm getting close to their age, and all of a sudden I have this new interest in uh, religion, in Christianity, in God. Maybe it's because I have a little more time in the boat. I'm spending a little bit more time by myself fishing. And you know, when you have that time, that's pretty precious time. Time to get away from your wife, time to get away from your friends, time to get away from everything. And it's just kind of you and, you know, solitude. It's a great time to maybe talk to God and try to get some answers. But, you know, the purpose of this video today is not to convert anybody, although I guess part of my job is to be a witness. I don't know how good a witness I am, uh, but I can tell you God's done some miraculous things in my life. There's a dozen times I should have died. I should have been 6 feet under. And through the grace of God and the prayers of others, I'm still around. But I think all of us kind of go through this. And I think what it really boils down to, it's not so much that I'm closer to my religion or closer to God. I think what it boils down to is I'm closer to meeting God and finding out what it's all about. And it may be that the reason some of us, as we get older, begin to ask more questions and become more involved with our respective religions, it might well be that we understand and know that we're not going to live forever. When you're 30 years old, you don't really think about it. When you're 30 years old, you just assume you're always going to be around. You certainly don't think a lot about death. But at 78, I'm already a year past the average lifespan. I've already outlived a brother and a sister and my parents. I've already outlived one of my children. So I think it's reasonable to start giving some thought to the hereafter. Just as an interesting aside, I actually started going to church again a couple of weeks ago, and I enjoyed it. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I tell people all the time I read the Bible a couple of times. I actually read it for the very first time when I was in the stockade in Fort Knox. I didn't have anything else to do. I don't want to get into why I was in the stockade, but just suffice it to say I didn't have any other reading material, and they did provide a Bible, so I had plenty of time on my hand. I started from the beginning, read to the end. But it's funny about the Bible. You can read the Bible, dozens of times, and each time you read it, you seem to learn something a little different. So I want to just kind of close this out by saying that none of us are going to live forever. And no matter how many fishing rods you have, how many boats you have, no matter how new your boat is, old your boat is, it doesn't matter how many big fish you've caught, how many tournaments you've won, none of that matters. There's only one thing that matters, and that's where you're going when you die. And I know where I'm going, and I'm looking forward to it. So, I'm going to try to be a real quick witness and just say, hey, look into it, check it out, because you're gonna meet your maker someday, and you want to know that you're going to join him and have peace for eternity. So thanks for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe if you can. It'd probably be the last time I talk about religion, I promise. But anyway, if you have any comments, any thoughts, feel free to leave me a couple of remarks. Thanks for tuning in.